Okay, so the real OGs will remember about 5 years ago when I did the original video of this. So, yes, this is a revised list of that original video. If you still want to watch it, you can. I still agree with most of the things, and some of those movies will still be on this list. But to me, this is just a bit more of an objective and cohesive list for the 10 best films of the 2010s. Same rules apply. Any film from January 1st, 2010 to December 31st of 2020 is eligible for this list. Starting off, number 10, a very, very, very strong film. We have Joker 2019, a new and original take on the character, heavily inspired by the interpretation of the Joker in The Dark Knight, leaning into a deeper side of mental illness, insanity, and almost escapism, as we see the Joker in this movie take on extreme forms of coping mechanisms, taking out the anger, hurt, and violence he felt by the world for so long on people who have wronged him and even symbols of people who have wronged him. Honestly, an amazing take on the character, amazing performance and dedication by Joaquin Phoenix. Too bad we didn't get to see more of this Joker and what he would become in the gosh awful sequel. Number 9 spot, we have The Night Comes For Us. I've given this director tons of props and other videos, but I think this is his best film and definitely one of the best films of the 2010s. We have The Night Comes For Us is a very dark story about a man who saves a girl from genocide and potential human trafficking. He pays the consequences of this in tenfold. I love movies where they explore the consequences of doing the right thing, and this movie executed that in the most brutal way possible. Even if the action is over the top and unrealistic at times, it still serves a great artistic purpose, which makes me love this movie even more. Every punch thrown, every bone cracked, gun fired, all has significance in what the director is trying to say. Memorable characters, impactful narrative, and possibly the best, most brutal action you have ever seen in a film. We have The Night Comes For Us. Number 8 spot, we have Rango, the 2011 lizard movie that deconstructs heroism and identity in probably one of the most unique ways possible. So much detail is put into the animation of this film. It's genuinely insane. A film without a camera has this good of cinematography and visual art. There's few films where I can say every single frame feels like moving artwork, but this one is one of those films. It perfectly uses inspiration from other Western movies that helps enforce the narrative here, not only in traditional Western villains, tropes, and styles, but the world building and storytelling as well. And I mean that in a sincere compliment type of way, not in they're copying type of way. Everything in this film does amazing. Like I said, it perfectly deconstructs identity and heroism and choosing your own story. Rango struggles with this until ultimately realizing he has to do what the people believe in him expect of him. Even though it's hard and even though there's a lot on the line for him, he still chooses where his story ends up. Even down to the character design, it serves as a meticulous reference to spaghetti westerns made by Sergio Leone. A lot of original spaghetti westerns have characters that don't even look similar to each other. All their facial structures are very, very different, and that just goes to show the lengths this movie has gone uh, to show how much it loves the Western, spaghetti Western era, but also how much it wants to tell its own story, which is what I really love. Rattlesnake Jake is such a memorable villain here, and also he's voiced by Davy Jones, which is an insane villain if you ask me, so definitely a deserved spot here. Number 7 spot, we have John Wick 3, the third installment to the culturally moving and very impactful John Wick series, which originally started in 2014 with its first film. John Wick 3 would have been the setup for its fourth and fifth film, which is why this film feels so high octane and grand in its presentation and storytelling. Even world advancement, you feel like the fourth installment where they were going to set up something much greater, and ultimately the fourth installment we did get didn't live up to what the third one built up. There's widespread belief that the plans for the fourth and fifth film were changed during COVID and writer strikes, but we don't know exactly for sure, but it does seem like that's what happened. So back to reviewing the third film. This film has the best storytelling and action out of the whole series. What makes an action movie amazing is letting the action be the story, and this film does just that. There's not a fight scene that goes by without enforcing the narrative and pushing the story forward, which is why this film is the best of its kind. It's fairly simple in terms of its setup, but being simple allows this film to go a very long way with its characters, creativity, and the action, the fight scenes. You obviously enjoy it best after seeing the first two and seeing where this story advances and where the world advances and aspects of the film and the characters. You get to learn a little bit more about them in just the short three movies, because timeline wise the films all take place really close within each other. Such a cliffhanger ending in this one as well. The opening night of this movie is something I would never forget, and it's still what really makes this movie special for me. Well deserved spot here, John Wick 3, best in the series still. Number six spot, we have Ford versus Ferrari. This is one of those movies where you can instantly tell the director knows exactly what he's doing and is a professional art creator as well. The cinematography alone would make this one of the best films you can possibly look at, but the characters, the narrative, everything feels super memorable. And since it's inspired by real events, anyone interested in cars, history, and just good films would absolutely love this movie. It also just proves how good of a modern day director James Mangold is. I do forgive him for Indiana Jones 5, but literally everything else he's made is peak. Mangold is proof that there needs to be more creative freedom in directing. Without completely reviewing and deconstructing every single good thing about this movie, I will say it does exactly what it's trying to do, and it does that perfectly. Number five spot, we have Logan, James Mangold's other masterpiece, right under the Dark Knight trilogy. This is probably the best comic book film ever made. Presented in the style of a neo-western, Logan tells the brutal story of an aging old Wolverine, pent up with years of anger, regret, trauma, finally finding purpose again when he finds someone to protect because he sees so much of himself in her, and he doesn't want her to experience the horrible life he's lived. He sacrifices so much of himself to make sure she doesn't turn out like him, and he gives her a new chance at life so she doesn't have to suffer the same way he did. The story unfolds in a very heartbreaking and brutal way with very good action and storytelling throughout the entire film. And for a while, when I first watched it all the way back in 2017, this was my favorite movie ever at the time. Not only does this film have a special place in my heart, but this film just has a special place in storytelling. You can possibly argue that the grizzled old man trope, struggling to care about anything anymore, but you can still see it's a whole lot deeper than that by just giving it a watch. Technically, it's also the conclusion to the Fox X-Men movies, but you can watch it alone as its own thing and still understand why the story is amazing and understand what he's trying to do with this movie. At number four, we have La La Land, a beautiful yet heartbreaking musical. This film was made by a professional art and film and music enjoyer, and you can tell just that by the opening scene alone how much this filmmaker loves art and music and filmmaking, down to the lyrics, choreography, cinematography, and visual presentation. Everything about this movie represented it in such a beautiful way, and it tells such a realistic story in such a fantasized way. Is what gets so many people emotional about this movie, and rightfully so. If you've heard about this movie to any capacity, you've probably also heard the premise, so I don't need to go super deep into that. But at its most bare bones, it's a romance movie where the relationship falls through in the end, but we see a glimpse of what could have been their perfect life together. Since I'm not fully here to review the film, I'd like to go a bit more into the technical and musical aspects of the film, which is where it really shines, especially every single piece of the soundtrack is woven together. The way it moves the narrative forward and the way it does so beautifully with every single song. And a lot of people say they're too cool for musicals or they never really watched that. They clearly have not watch this movie, and it really breaks my heart what they're missing out on, since this is such a beautiful experience. And again, just the fact that the opening scene alone references Technicolor just screams how much this filmmaker loves music and filmmaking. Goes to say definitely one of the best films of the 2010s and probably of all time. Number three, we have Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, a film that perfectly proves Quentin Tarantino is in his absolute prime. It surprises me how many people argue that this movie has no story. And yes, I admit it's a slow burn to get to the ending, but that does not mean there is no story. Also, the narrative is woven between these two fantastic characters, and their character work obviously has a story when the narrative is woven between two fantastic characters and phenomenal character work. I love how he's saying so much by presenting so little. That's one aspect of this film that does so well. Quentin is truly showing his love of this era of cinema, many people's golden age, and the nostalgia is very high with this one. On the other hand, he tells separate stories between Cliff and Rick Dalton, two best friends who eventually have to go their separate ways but try and make the best of what they have in their current time. Since Rick spends most of his time pretending that he's Cliff, Cliff spends all of his time being Cliff, and he creates a really cool dynamic where someone who's supposed to be a star actor gets all in their head about potentially being washed up in their later years, while a stuntman is clearly in his physical prime. Regardless of his age, he does what he wants when he wants, and it shows so much throughout the story, even tying in aspects of the Manson murders. Again, just saying so much while presenting itself as so minimal, even though a lot of it can be over the top in very Quentin Tarantino style. There's still a lot to say and a lot to be said about this film. It's presenting so much, again, while being so minimalistic almost, and that's one of my favorite aspects of this movie. Number two, Django Unchained. A lot of people's favorite Tarantino movie, and I am not quick to disagree. Since I do hail this as one of his best films, Django Unchained tells the brutal story of a slave who is freed by a bounty hunter that decides to help him get his wife back from an evil slave dealer named Calvin Candy. Now, if you've heard of this movie to any extent, you very likely have heard the premise, so I don't have to go super deep into explaining it, but there's so many things that make this film amazing. Beyond its premise, there's the storytelling, the action, the visuals, the acting and performances all being amazing by every single actor. Even the smaller roles and side roles, there's still amazing acting. Um, just everything about the story, the visuals, the artwork. Again, this is another film where it feels like every frame of it is literally moving artwork. I don't see a lot of people mentioning the cinematography enough because it does so well. Like in certain scenes where there's high intensity, you'll feel it in the camera work, or when a character is expressing themselves, you'll feel it in the camera work. I love when Django comes in on his blue suit looking all heroic, because that's the first time he's ever felt free and the freedom to express himself in any way he can. So he's choosing something very loud, very attention grabbing. All the other tropes and references it has to original spaghetti westerns, and rightfully so, because spaghetti westerns have shaped a lot of the tropes we see in movies now, like anti-heroes, like side characters, like villain tropes. A lot of them, or at least to some capacity, originate from spaghetti westerns, and he is paying homage in the best way possible here. An amazing film, peak storytelling, peak acting, peak everything. Go watch this movie if you haven't already by any degree. And at the number one spot, an absolutely perfect ending to Batman's story, we have The Dark Knight Rises. After 8 years of not a single sighting of the Batman, he reemerges from the shadows in an attempt to stop the unstoppable force that is Bane. This movie has some of the best character work in the series, from Batman to Bane to Jim Gordon. It all serves as a perfect conclusion to the characters and narrative. Batman has sacrificed so much of himself before in the first two films of this series, but after getting his back snapped in half by Bane, he crawls out of the prison a new man, restoring hope in Gotham and saving the city one last time. Even though Bane exposed all the aspects of corruption and injustice within Gotham, Batman still chose the right thing above all else. A lot of people hold The Dark Knight as one of the best films of all time, and I'm not quick to disagree. But to truly appreciate The Dark Knight for everything that it is, you have to realize Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises are just as good as each of the films in the series, and are pieces to a complete narrative puzzle. Again, this film does so well with its character work. The introduction of Selena Kyle as Catwoman, playing as sort of a love interest for Batman, except not at first. And then we see Alfred almost quitting on Bruce Wayne because Alfred just can't bear to see the path that Bruce Wayne is forcing himself down. And it is just so many amazing things about this film that I truly think it makes it the best film of the decade, especially since it's the conclusion to Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises. It all completes itself perfectly as one story. You truly can't have one without the other. There's so many amazing things about every film, but I think this film objectively is possibly the best one. And even if it isn't, like I said, I think they're all equally as good and have equally good parts about themselves, and it's all one piece to a massive and meticulous narrative puzzle. Thank you guys for watching. For more film discussion, film reviews, short films that I make, and music I make sure to subscribe and tell your friends. Thank you.